Good day, everyone. On behalf of Acting Director Tracy Troutman at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, let me welcome you to the webinar on the use of body-worn cameras in specialized police units. My name is Dominique Burton. I'm the Outreach Coordinator and Site Analyst for the Body-Worn Camera Grant Program at CNA, and I'll provide the introduction for today's webinar. This is another webinar in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program. We thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its investment in the Body-Worn Camera Grant Program and the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit and a range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies implementing body-worn cameras. The Bureau supports state, county, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many, many ways, and we are grateful that they do. This webinar will address how some police agencies are implementing body-worn cameras in specialized units. We spend a lot of our time thinking about and discussing how body-worn cameras are used in patrol units and a little time focusing on their use in specialized units. So we thought it would be a good idea to look into that aspect of body-worn camera programs. Before I continue and introduce our speakers, let me turn it over to John Markovich from BJA for a few words.
Thanks, Dominique. I just want to say a few words, and thanks for tuning in after a long holiday weekend. As Dominique said, my name is John Markovich, and I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance. I'm also the Program Manager for the Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program. Just by way of brief background, beginning in 2015, the Bureau of Justice Assistance made an investment and commitment to body-worn cameras. While doing so, we recognized that body-worn cameras were more than just a rapidly evolving technology tool. They're not just a plug-and-play tool, a technology that you can buy and implement immediately. When properly implemented, they have the potential to impact the practice of policing in many ways. We know body-worn cameras can be a great source of digital evidence, and they can improve justice outcomes, not just for the police, but also for downstream criminal justice actors, such as prosecutors. We know that the community is supportive of body-worn cameras and generally benefit from body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras are posited to improve transparency and accountability among law enforcement agencies deploying them, again, provided they're implemented with sound policies, sound training, and compliance assurance mechanisms. Thus far, we've had 2 years of funding cycles, and we've awarded nearly $40 million to fund over 160 law enforcement agencies of various sizes and types. We expect to award approximately 80 more awards in September of 2017. So with that background, I'll turn it back over to Dominique for the introduction. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I would like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. Dr. Michael White is a professor of criminal justice and associate director of the Center for Violence Prevention and Community Safety at Arizona State University. Dr. Jane Gaub is a researcher and senior project manager at the Center for Violence Prevention and Community Safety at Arizona State University. She and Dr. White will discuss some of the recent research on body-worn cameras. Following them will be 3 police practitioners who will discuss their experiences with body-worn cameras in specialized units. Commander Noah Johnson from the Tempe Police Department, Lieutenant John Leon from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and Assistant Chief Michael Petty from the Fayetteville, North Carolina Police Department. We thank these presenters for working with us to put this webinar together and for their participation today. Permit me to make a few other comments. This webinar is recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later on our website. There will be opportunities for questions and participation during this webinar, so please make your thoughts and questions known. I can assure you that others will appreciate hearing what you have to say. If you don't get a chance to voice your comments or questions, please use the chat utility to the right of your screen, and we'll do our best to respond to your input. Please make sure to put your phones on mute by pressing *6 and to unmute by pressing #6. If you are having any technical difficulties, please message the host by using the chat utility to the right of your screen, and we will help you as well. Following the webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete the evaluation and give us your honest thoughts and recommendations, and please let us know other topics you think we should cover in future webinars. Now let me also thank Denise Rodriguez at CNA, who does most of the background work to make sure these webinars go smoothly. Dr. White, we'll start off with you.
Jan Galb.
That's right.
She's going to talk about some of the, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna start off with a little bit of background, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Jan Galb, and she's going to talk about some of the results we have from some work we've been doing in Spokane, Washington, and Tempe, Arizona, particularly with regard to this question we're here to discuss, which is how this technology plays out in units that are not involved in the kind of routine day-to-day responding to calls for service that patrol officers deal with. And then we'll get to hear from our law enforcement partners from Tempe, Arizona, Fayetteville, North Carolina, and Las Vegas, Nevada on their thoughts on this question. So when I talk about body-worn cameras, I like to provide a bit of background before we jump in, just to kind of put some context around the emergence of body-worn cameras and why why they've diffused so rapidly in law enforcement. And the first point I like to raise to set that stage is that a lot of people focus on kind of the summer of 2014 as the genesis of body-worn cameras in policing. And the fact of the matter is that the technology has a much longer history in law enforcement. So, for example, there were a couple of police departments in the UK that began experimenting with early versions of body-worn cameras as far back as 2005. And that's almost 12 years ago. In the United States, we've had a number of agencies that began to experiment and deploy body-worn cameras in 2009, 2010, departments like Oakland, California, and Albuquerque. So the point is that law enforcement has been thinking about body-worn cameras for quite a while now. But the second point, obviously, we got to think about is the fact that interest in the technology absolutely exploded in the summer of 2014. And of course, the start of that was really a series of citizen deaths, Mike Brown and Ferguson, Eric Garner. And what happened was, as a consequence of those events, there was tremendous scrutiny placed on police, particularly with regard to relationships with minority citizens. And there was a real strong effort from that point forward to develop police reform, particularly in this area. And as you can see from the slide, some of the demand for police reform came from advocacy groups, but there was also significant demand for reform from politicians, from citizens, and of course there was a lot of attention at the federal level as well. And body-worn cameras really emerged in this crisis as a potential solution. A lot of people thought that the technology could go a long way in terms of addressing some of the issues that had been raised. And so it's safe to say that in the last few years, literally thousands of police departments in the United States have started body-worn camera programs or are in the planning phases of doing so. And that quick diffusion of technology like that presents real problems for researchers like myself and like Jan, because we think one of our primary jobs is to provide evidence that allows law enforcement leaders to make informed decisions so that they can engage in evidence-based practices. But when you have something diffuse as rapidly as body-worn cameras, it becomes very, very difficult for us to keep up. And as recently as 3 years ago, you could count the number of good body-worn camera academic studies on one hand, less than 5. But we've been scrambling over the last couple of years, we researchers, and we've been doing a pretty good job at catching up. Last count, there were more than 30 studies that are underway. And, the ASU team, we're one of those researchers that are trying to catch up and trying to provide that evidence that would allow law enforcement practitioners to make informed decisions about this technology. So I'll just talk for a minute or two about the study that we've been involved in, and then I'll turn it over to Jan, who can get into the issues of the specialized units. The study we've been involved in, as I said, we've been working with Spokane, Washington, and Tempe, Arizona. And we've been doing this for about 2 years now with these two agencies. The research that we've been engaged in is funded by the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. And in 2015, when we started the study, both departments had made a couple of important decisions already. One is that they had decided that they were going to start body-worn camera programs, but importantly for us, they hadn't started the rollout yet, so they were still in the planning phase. The second piece that was important for us was that each agency had decided that they were going to start with patrol officers and that they were not going to give all patrol officers a camera on the same day. They wanted to do a phased rollout, if you will. And that made sense for a lot of reasons in terms of logistics, in terms of trying to troubleshoot issues as they come up. So what the ASU team, what my team decided to do was we began discussions with each chief to try to randomize that process where the phase rollout would occur. That is, in each case we had 2 phases, and again, this was all patrol officers, and we wanted to essentially hold a lottery that would determine which officers would get their cameras in phase 1 and which would get their cameras in phase 2. And that randomized period was, as you can see from the slide, in each case was about 6 months. The departments, very progressive, agreed to do the randomized rollout. And of course, if you know anything about research methods, you know the randomized control trial is the gold standard. It's what we seek to achieve when we're engaged in research. So, and you can see the dates there, but in each case, we did the randomized piece to determine who would get cameras in phase 1. In Spokane, for example, that was about 82 officers. Those officers had cameras. The other group did not for a period of 6 months, and then during phase 2, all officers got cameras. Now, when we began this study, we were focused on many of the major issues that other researchers have been focused on, such as, for example, officer perceptions. We've done officer surveys in both departments multiple times, pre- and post-deployment, asking officers all sorts of questions about their perceptions of body-worn cameras. We're also focused on citizen perception, so my team has done literally hundreds of interviews of citizens in each jurisdiction. These are citizens who had encounters with police officers that may have been recorded. And of course, we've been focused on use of force and complaints and officer injuries, as these are what I call the big ticket items. So as I said, when we were working with these departments, in both cases, they focused on deployment to patrol officers. And I think probably the vast majority of agencies that have started or are planning body-worn cameras start that same way. They focus on patrol officers, and that makes sense for a lot of reasons. As we know, patrol officers responding to calls for service, they have the vast majority of contacts with citizens, and it's in those contacts where you want the body-worn camera present. And of course, patrol officers also represent typically about two-thirds of the sworn patrol force or sworn force in a department. But a theme that emerged in both Spokane and Tempe as we moved forward was what can this technology do for those other units that are not typically responding to calls for service, K-9, gang units, detective units, things like that. So we wanted to take advantage of the relationship that we had with both of these agencies, and we know from our work with BJA that a number of departments across the country were having this same question about specialized units and how body-worn cameras could be used in those units, what the challenges might be. So we took advantage of our work with Spokane and Tempe, and we decided to explore this issue with those units. And I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Galb, who can really kind of get into some of the work that we had done. So Jan, it's all you.
Hi, great. Thank you, Mike. So like Mike said, we were talking to the specialized units, and what we started hearing from them was, I don't know how it works in patrol, or I don't know how patrol officers do X, but dot, dot, dot. So they weren't really sure if what they were doing translated over into patrol, and how they were using cameras translated to patrol. And so we started seeing that this was really important. We needed to look at the non-patrol officers as well, and how cameras are implemented and how their experiences in this deployment. So we conducted semi-structured focus groups with specialized units in both cities. It was a total of 17 units. Those focus groups were audio recorded, and then they were transcribed. And then our team pulled out themes from those interviews and focus groups we asked the units questions about the benefits and drawbacks of cameras, both for patrol and policing in general, and also for them specifically. We asked them about some of the challenges that they faced in integrating cameras into their daily work. And we especially asked them about some of the unique considerations that police departments should think about when they're deciding whether or not to equip specialty units with body-worn cameras. And they got very chatty when we asked them that question. So the units that we talked to, some of them are the same between the two cities, traffic and K-9 SWAT units. Some of them are a little different based on the specific needs of the city. So Tempe, we talked to their gang unit, we talked to a mounted unit, which is forces, and we specifically we talked to their detectives unit. At the time of doing the interviews and focus groups, Tempe was, to our knowledge, the only department in the country that had equipped body-worn cameras on their detectives, their plainclothes detectives, not their undercovers, not their surveillance, but the criminal investigation detectives. And in Spokane, we talked to their negotiators, we talked to their anti-crime team, who deals with criminal confidential informants. So a few were different, and some of them were very similar or served similar purposes. So for both the benefits and the drawbacks, I'm going to kind of briefly mention themes, and then we'll go back into each of those themes in more detail using some of the quotes from the focus groups, because I think the officers had really great things to say about each of those that is best, mentioned in their words. And then at the end, we're going to discuss 5 broad recommendations for departments considering whether specialty units should have body cameras in their police departments. So for the benefits, oops, I'm sorry, I went back too far. So for the benefits of body cameras, you'll notice that some of them are similar to general patrol. So a lot of the officers mentioned evidentiary value, that it's a better record of what happened. I think every single sergeant we talked to said it helps with handling complaints. But then a lot of them, once we started kind of probing and we delved into it a little deeper, they started mentioning things that were more specific to specialized units. So that it helps them to document charges, it helps to document the steps that officers take prior to using force. It is really helpful for training. And then they talked about some of the innovative uses that they used the cameras for. So in terms of the specialty units mentioning benefits that are the same, there's some of the things that we hear from the patrol officers as well. So in this particular quote, the SWAT officer here is touching on a couple of the things that we hear. We hear about the evidentiary value. We hear about the storytelling capacity of body cameras. In this case, both departments allow officers to view the footage before and while writing reports. And so many of the officers mentioned that it helps to make for a better report because they can go back and watch the video. And also that it's kind of going in the same vein, that it's a better record of what happens. So it shows what happens. It's beneficial when handling complaints. And in this particular officer, this neighborhood conditions officer in Spokane, he says, you can go back, you can pull the video footage when there's a complaint, and you can say, yes, that is what happened, or no, that's not what happened here. And as this officer says, I think 99% of the time it shows that our people are doing things right, which can go a long way with some of those police community relations concerns or stresses that may come up, when the footage shows that the officers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. In terms of some of the more specific things, for specialty units, documenting charges came up quite frequently, and the ability here, the bike officers in Tempe, there's a bike unit, and they patrol about a 1-mile stretch of Mill Avenue, which Mill Avenue is like a bar district directly adjacent to the ASU main campus. So 50, 60,000 undergrad students, and then they all converge on this one, 1-mile stretch. So the bike officers are busy, especially on weekends. And so one thing that came out was this ability to document charges, because it was much easier to, rather than writing it down in your report, and it shows much better on the video. DUI officers said the same thing. You can write in your report that you did, XYZ test for a field sobriety test, and they, here were the results of this field sobriety test, or you can show the field sobriety test and show the person stumbling and slurring their speech and whatever, and it just shows so much better. So this bike officer here is talking about disorderly conducts, which they deal a lot with in Tempe on Mill, and they were saying that it helps with the prosecutor, and the bolded part at the end. It goes from two guys fighting on the road to look how much chaos this has caused, because two people start out fighting on the sidewalk and 50 people are around, and then it spills into the street and you're blocking traffic and there's a bunch of people, and it just causes this huge commotion and a lot of chaos. So additionally, training came up quite a bit in both one-on-one training, like self-training, and then officers being able to go back and look at their own footage and see how they could do something better. Even if the outcome was what they wanted and, force was used or whatever the outcome of goal was, then even if that occurred, they could go back and see if maybe their tone could have been changed or they could have done something slightly differently. Also, entire units would use the video footage for training purposes. So here, again, we have the bikes. The bike squad runs 2 or 3 times a year, runs a bike school where they teach new bike officers or people who would like to be bike officers how to properly use a bike on Mill, with people around and in a police capacity. And they use footage of the officers, the current bike officers, doing things correctly and doing things incorrectly, so that the people who want to become bike officers can see how to properly do a tactic, whether that's taking a curb at a proper 90-degree angle or, how to use bikes to fence off people. And they can see that bike cops do mess up and what happens when they mess up. And as they said here, they now have about 20 to 30 videos that they can rotate through for bike school and show. So much easier to show people rather than try to have to explain it to them or watch them do it themselves and then say, hey, remember how that happened? So they can see it on the videos. There are also a number of innovative uses that people mentioned for using the cameras. Taking the camera off the mount, the chest mount, and being able to, see over a fence or around a corner into an attic. A few people talked about taking it off to just get a better vantage point. Traffic does it a lot where they can take it off and then record footage of people doing things properly to document why the person who had done it incorrectly didn't have to do it that way. This particular crisis negotiator from Spokane talked about when they're dealing with people on bridges. There's a number of bridges in Spokane. They get many call-outs for suicide, people threatening to commit suicide by jumping off the bridge. And a lot of them are very agitated, and so this particular time the officer noted that they were able to take the camera off, zip tie it to a pole, step back, and then use the smartphone app to be able to talk to the person without having to be next to them, because being near them was making them very agitated. So it's just a more innovative use. That's not actually what the camera is supposed to be used for, but it was effective and it worked, and it achieved the goal that they needed. So some of the drawbacks that they mentioned of body cameras, again, there are some that are similar to patrol, so an increased workload. They do have to have extra steps that they have to take that they didn't have to do before. They have to dock the camera, they have to download, they have to tag the videos, they have to, go in and do each of these things. Many of them mentioned the idea that because of body cameras, an officer's word isn't taken with integrity, but some of them were a little bit more unique to specialized units. So the idea of technical components causing issues, the challenges faced by those with take-home vehicles, the idea of public access to tactics, what and who is on video, and then how the incidents are viewed by the public. So it was really common for us to hear, both from patrol officers through conversations and then also during these focus groups, that the integrity or the officer's word is not taken at face value anymore, and a lot of them trace that back to the advent of body cameras. So this particular officer is kind of touching on two parts of that. The first, here in the bolded part at the very beginning, everyone thinks that if you have a camera that it's going to catch everything. So if it's not on camera, it didn't happen, is what they say happens. Well, that wasn't on camera, and you said this happened, but I don't see it, so it didn't happen. The last part that he mentioned, or this person mentioned, that somebody gets to watch it in slow motion and 14 times over and over and over again. And so this is a Monday morning quarterbacking. You know, the officer's operating in the moment, making split-second decisions, doesn't get to rewind and decide if that was a good idea and do something else, but someone else gets to come in and watch it and slow it down and speed it up and, you know, watch it multiple times, and they felt like it was unfair. And this can be both external from the public or the media, and also internal from supervisors or leadership. But some of the things that were more specific to specialized units, the technical components. There are very technical aspects that need to be considered, things that might not affect patrol officers but could cause problems for specialized units. So issues of cameras like physically where the power on-off switch is, or how a camera is activated and deactivated for recording, can be really simple, but when you're in close quarters or you're dealing with people very close to yourself versus, you know, dealing with people a little bit further away, those things can matter. So bike officers, the gang officers, a couple of other officers mentioned that cameras get powered off or recordings get turned off multiple times, you know, several times in a night maybe. And several officers talked about when doing nighttime, like surveillance or undercover work, that sometimes the lights can illuminate their faces and then give away who they are, and that they'd actually been burned a number of times because of that. So then they start taping the cameras with black, like electrical tape or athletic tape. Take-home vehicles was a big issue as well. So like K-9 officers or traffic officers who take their vehicles home, they often don't start or end their shift at a station, and so it can interrupt the flow of their day, which means that they have to charge or download their cameras and their videos in chunks throughout the day, and try to find time to be able to come back to a station, the camera doesn't get charged, or the videos start to stack up. So this officer here, this traffic officer is talking about when they do DUI enforcement details, and then they have, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30 videos. You come in, and then you have all these videos, and then you're trying to download them while also going out and doing your normal work, which can just cause a lot of issues. Most of them said it's an easy fix. A USB cord to their department laptop would solve the problem. Traffic officers said that still doesn't really work because on their motorcycles they don't have laptops. But for the K-9 officers and a few others, they said that would be a pretty simple fix. But you know, depending on the department policy, that may or may not be something that's permitted. Public access to tactics came up quite a bit, especially with SWAT officers. It's one of the most common concerns we hear from police departments about implementing cameras on SWAT officers and K-9 officers. It's most problematic in states with very open public records laws, because anything that's on video then becomes public record. So this particular SWAT officer it was concerned about everything being open to public records, and basically thinking as a potential bad guy, that if you were that person, you know, I would go do my research and I would own every piece of the footage to know exactly what was going to happen, so that then officers were concerned that their tactics would be used against them, or the people would play to the weaknesses of their tactics. So in addition to what is captured on video, also who is captured on video. So it's a problem for units dealing with vulnerable populations, children, people dealing with responding to sexual assault, rape, you know, interviewing like family members or friends of homicide victims, that kind of thing, and also those who deal with confidential informants. So this quote comes from the anti-crime team in Spokane. As I mentioned, they handle confidential informants, and they wear cameras, and they were very concerned that because they were going to be recording people, and then they were going to try to to turn them to be a confidential informant, that people would be able to connect the dots, and someone higher in the organization or higher in the group would be able to figure out that this person had become a snitch, and then it would be a problem. So the bolded part of this quote kind of gets at that. It's only going to take once, and it's going to get someone killed, and we're going to be on the hook for it. And that was ultimately the concern they had, that somebody was going to get hurt because they had been on camera. And also how incidents are perceived. We heard multiple times from various units a variation on a theme of police work isn't pretty. And specialized units don't typically deal with the most mundane encounters. They deal with, some of the very high intensity encounters, those that are more likely to use force, that kind of thing. So the question came up, what should be available to the public? Canine bites, for example, were described as being very brutal and gruesome when seen on video. And so even if the dog acts exactly as the dog is supposed to act, and the handler did exactly what the handler was supposed to do, this canine officer was concerned that you show that video to a jury, and they're going to look at it and they're going to say nobody should have to go through that. And so having it on video, how that incident can be perceived, it can be perceived in a way that everyone did what they were supposed to do, but it's not going to be perceived in a positive light. So kind of taking everything together, we came up with 5 main recommendations or takeaways from all of this for departments considering whether to outfit specialized units with body cameras. And the first is to consider individually the technical aspects for each unit. So that may be something as simple as which mount you should use, or are certain mounts needed for certain units. And what maybe seems logical to some people doesn't play out in practice. So we had traffic and bike officers that everyone assumed, including them, that they would want to use like a head mount or a glasses mount for their cameras, and they ended up not wanting to do that because the video ended up being real jerky and shaky. So trying things out to see what works for each unit. And again, some of those technical aspects like lights and mounting options and just all of those types of technical things need to be considered for each unit individually, and just with the idea that if you're going to outfit your whole department with cameras, including specialized units, consider those things and bring those people in. And kind of flowing from that, be open to the idea that adjusting policy, your administrative policy may need to be adjusted. So the idea of take-home docks. Your policy may say that you have to dock your camera, a dock and walk sort of scenario in your station, but perhaps for those with take-home vehicles, they're allowed to dock and charge at home or download at home. Or allowing people to alter their cameras with black electrical tape, even though that's not in your policy, or your policy may even say you're not allowed to alter your camera. That may be necessary. And so being open to that. Understand the challenges for body cameras in specialized units. The big key way to do that is to invite officers from those units into the planning process, ask for their input about policy, mounting choices, those kinds of things. Even just talk to them, because especially if you have already implemented cameras among your patrol units, and then you're going to put them onto specialized units, they talk. People talk to each other, and so they probably have an idea of what they think will and won't work, or they may think of challenges or concerns that maybe leadership hasn't considered. So to bring those officers in early in the planning process and include their input. Fourth, manage public expectations. This is true just in general, but especially for specialized units. Managing to the public what can actually be seen on video. So the idea that we had a CSI effect for like DNA evidence, and you don't want a CSI effect with body camera footage. What the public believes should be visible on a camera, and that it should be in HD, and that it's going to show 360 degrees, and we all know that that's not true, but people think that. They think it's going to have great night vision, and it doesn't. And so managing what is feasible for people to actually see, and then also what should be made public. So managing the expectations of what people would be able to access. Maybe you your department decides that, you know, canine bites or certain uses of force or SWAT encounters or whatever are not going to be made public, but just letting people know that so that you can then manage the accountability and transparency issues that might come up because of that. And then fifth, realize that body cameras may not be appropriate for all units. Body cameras aren't a silver bullet solution. We all know that. And they may not be appropriate for all units. So the safety of everyone involved is, at the end of the day, the key issue. You know, we want officers to be safe. We want the people that they interact with to be safe. And so if putting a camera on an officer puts somebody in danger or makes someone not safe, then we might need to rethink if that's a good idea moving forward. This is actually, sorry, I had one last thing. This is actually a larger, like Mike mentioned, it's part of a larger project, and we put together a report on this portion, the specialized unit portion. You can read the full version of the technical report. I think it's embedded in the PowerPoint, but it's also available on the toolkit, and I believe also on the TTA website. You can contact either Mike or I as well to get it, or if you have any questions, you know, we urge you to read the full report. There's a little bit more detail there. And if you, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask either of us, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Hello, my name's Noah Johnson, Commander here at Tempe Police Department. Just going to give you my experience. Dr. Gobb and Dr. White have really kind of explained real well the overview, and I'll just get technically into some of the specific things that we dealt with here at the Tempe Police Department. One of the, probably one of the best things we did, well, no doubt the best thing we did is we kind of started down this road even before Ferguson had occurred. And we were looking more of a digital evidence management system overall, not just body-worn cameras, but obviously body-worn cameras is a large piece of that. So we developed a very comprehensive stakeholder committee as we started to implement that, to include line-level police officers, patrol officers, sergeants, union, things of that nature. But what you're going to kind of hear through my conversation is, what we did kind of miss is getting those specialized units in from the very beginning, even though our intent was to assign a camera to every sworn police officer from lieutenant on down in our agency. But we just primarily put our focus on the patrol out at the beginning. And I'm having a hard time controlling my slides here. Just give me 1 minute. There we go. So just to give you background on the Tempe Police Department, we're a medium-sized agency. We have about 350 sworn police officers, total about 500 employees, including our professional staff. As we mentioned, Tempe is right in the middle of ASU's main campus, or I should say, I guess the main campus in the middle of Tempe, which brings a very distinct dynamic to our city with just the college environment. In addition, we are quite the special event destination. We have a significant lake and park nearby, and so we'll have events up to 60, 80,000 people very easily on a pretty regular basis. So we, as been mentioned, we participated in the study with ASU, and we did a two-phase approach. Obviously, operationally, that was a little better to make sure we didn't send them all at one time, and then, of course, to help the study as well. And we, within those rollouts, primarily was what we call our field operations, but traditional patrol division. Now, within our patrol division, we do have some specialized units. The bike squad, we have about 22 bike officers, which is pretty large. A gang unit and canine unit and mounted unit are within the original rollout. So those specialized units were already there. We then added the detective side of the house that included, obviously, your traditional detectives, property detectives, sex crimes detectives, homicide, et cetera. And then, of course, our special investigations, which is your undercover groups. And our agency is a little differently. Our SWAT tactical side is housed within special investigations. However, it's decentralized. So there are some tactical officers that reside in the field ops division. It might be a bike officer, patrol officer who got a camera very early on. So as we went down the road and started, after we did our first rollout, and frankly, when we did our rollout in our field ops, it went very, very smoothly. And I attribute a lot of that to us organizing that stakeholder committee very early. I think without a doubt, the issue research involvement was huge as well. Dr. Gaub, I'll put a little shout out to her. She spent numerous hours out there on ride-alongs with police officers and built a legitimacy with them and a trust with them, and was able to provide a lot of feedback that they not only heard from their commander, from their officer on the committee, but they also heard from their issue researchers, which really helped solve a lot of the questions. But all those things that we did great, and one of the things we didn't do well is with our specialized units, especially as you get into the tactical side, and, search warrants and things like that. It's already been kind of mentioned, is the concerns, the tactical side. Hey, somebody can figure out how our tactics. People will see, violent things that police officers potentially have to do by sending a police dog and things of that nature, which, I think as we sit here isn't really a great argument, but from an officer's perspective, you kind of get it. And I think if we had those officers on the committee from the beginning, we could openly discuss those issues, and they could build trust with their command that we understand those things are going to happen and they're going to be on camera, and we'll deal with it. But I think as you go down this road, and if you're going to if you're doing it right from the get-go, or you're going to eventually get into the world of having your specialized units have cameras, is really consider having specific potentially policies for them that fits into their environment. For one, that gives them a voice, obviously, in their own deployment, but it also gives the right expectations for them that might be different for a normal patrol officer or bike officer out there on the street. Especially, I come from the tactical world, so I kind of understand, tactical entries. The SWAT officers may be sitting at a perimeter for 3 hours before they're really going to do anything. Well, do the cameras really need to be running for those 3 hours? It's probably after they leave the last location of cover that maybe they activate those cameras when they know things are actually going to happen. Canine deployment, same thing. They might be sitting on perimeter for quite some time until they need to get the camera on, although knowing that things could potentially happen very quickly. So take all those things into consideration as you go down that road, but have them have a voice in that process. And I talked about the early discussions. I will say, and some of you who are in the tactical world probably already know this, that the outside tactical organizations, or some of the attorneys there, are advising against body-worn camera for tactical teams. Personally, I think it's a little short-sighted, but I think it comes from the perspective of defending potentially a police officer from the shooting and things of that nature, instead of the kind of the overall purpose and transparency issues and the things that are concerned for law enforcement agencies and ultimately the officers themselves. In a lot of my discussions with the officers, I said, do you really want to be in the place of being in a unit that is more potentially likely getting involved in officer-involved shooting? You don't have a camera, but the other 200 police officers do. So, those things you need to talk through and kind of give a little broader view. And we have done that now that we kind of recognize our mistake and gone back and had those discussions. It's also helped out that like I mentioned, some of my tactical officers are already been using the camera for about a year and very successfully and have been comfortable with it. So have specialized unit representatives on the implementation committee. What's really important here, and I think most of you probably get it or understand it, is the representation needs to be experienced police officers who already kind of see the value of the body-worn camera, or are at least open to it, and are willing to go out and basically, more or less be your disciple and engage his or her fellow officers out there in whatever unit they represent. Those three things are just absolutely necessary. And when I talk about experienced officer, I think you know what I'm talking about, that officer's street credibility, who's been there, who's been here 10, 15, 20 years, and has already experienced a lot of things and can bring back that value back to the units. And finally, some of the fall lessons here. The mounting concerns, we really didn't think about it, and clearly should have. Obviously, detectives do not wear the same gear that a patrol officer or a bike officer or even a tactical officer wears. They wear a tie, or they wear a polo shirt and Dockers, whatever it might be. You need to kind of vet those issues out early. Believe it or not, the officers, you give them the chance, they become pretty creative themselves. Hopefully, the vendors out there will start to adjust for this type of deployment. As Dr. Gobb mentioned, we were kind of one of the early agencies, so as it becomes more popular, I'm sure they'll start to do that. But for the most part, our detectives are wearing them on their belt, which, for the guys that are over 6 feet tall, kind of it works, but otherwise doesn't. So they have to come up with different ways. Moving the camera, mounting it in different places controlled interview environment. Of course, they can do those things, and that they have, but get them early in the discussion so you can kind of vet those things out early. Take-home vehicles. We kind of knew this was going to be a problem, but we didn't quite know how to fix it, because there's some considerations you have to have. If you have the officer, first of all, if you have the officer, not mandatory to download the videos at the end of the shift. In my scenario, I have traffic officers who have take-home police motorcycles, and then I have canine handlers who have obviously take-home marked police car, and they're taking their dog home to their house. They may be on a call at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They're done. They just drive home, and their shift's over instead of going back to the station. Or, we don't really want to pay them overtime to sit there for an hour and download videos. So the first big, thing to hurdle is essentially you're letting your officers take evidence home and maintain it, albeit inside the camera, inside their residence until they come back, which could be some of an issue. At least you have to have that discussion. Secondly, if you're going to have the officers a process to download at home, are they using their own internet service provider to do that? So are there issues with them transferring evidence across their personal line and what that can open up? And obviously, then the questions, are you going to pay for my internet service and things of that nature? The officers, my experience so far has been managing it pretty well. Canine handlers typically don't get that many videos. The biggest take-home vehicle officers are my traffic officers for making a significant amount of videos. Traditionally, when they come back to the station to write their reports, that's the time they download their videos. However, as our technology processes are moving forward, we're now getting them small laptops, and they're doing their reports now on the street. And so now it's an issue that we're going to have to deal with. How are we going to deal with the traffic officers who really are not going to come back to the station that much anymore, because now they can do their reports in a restaurant or in a park or whatever, or on the back of their motorcycle if they want to. So all those things you need to vet through. Again, the early discussion is huge, and everybody's going to have their own specialized services and how they operate, and whether they're a call out and things like that. Also, those of you who have a decentralized SWAT team like we do, you need to think about that. In our scenario, the decentralized officers have all their tactical equipment on the tactical van that goes to the call, and they just dress out the van. So now they have to kind of maintain their body camera, either themselves, and make sure they take it home with them in case they get a call out. I'll throw one more thing in there that kind of pops into my mind is off-duty work. If you require your officers to, if they're going to wear their uniform working off-duty and carry their cameras, which we do, that's another piece you're going to kind of have to vet out. When you're going to allow them time to download the videos, you're going to let them wait till their next shift, all those types of things. So, well, thanks for listening, and that's my contribution here from Tempe Police Department. I'll turn over to Lieutenant Leon from Las Vegas Metro.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to be here today to talk to you from the perspective of Las Vegas Metro and what our program looks like and how we're moving forward in addressing the needs of specialized units that we have. Much of my discussion is really going to echo and reinforce a lot of what's already been presented by the ASU research team, as well as Commander Johnson from Tempe. We've encountered many similar problems and no really one set solution on how these problems are addressed. A little background, obviously here in Las Vegas, it's Clark County. It's about 8,000 square miles. We have about 2 million residents and about 45 million visitors a year. So that kind of breaks us down into 4 distinct types of policing that we have here in the county, one being the Strip and the tourist corridor, the other being the surrounding community, and the last 2 being our small rural area, which is a resident area, and then we have Laughlin, which is our small city outline about an hour and a half away. So each of those 4 types of policing models bring a unique challenge on how we deploy for our specialized units. So we have about 2,500 sworn of those. We have 1,850 in body cameras, 1,600 of those being patrol uniform wearers. So that leaves us about 250 officers that wear a non-traditional uniform in SWAT, gangs, canine, resident officers, which is that rural area, and our traffic officers. So we've been a proponent of body-worn cameras since really its inception. We've been involved in a number of studies. We've developed some auto-labeling to allow the officers not to have to worry about matching videos up to events, as well as we've worked very hard on a compliance piece to ensure the officers are actually activating their cameras when they need to. So we have a very robust program that has really been centrally focused on the standard patrol officer who works his 10-hour shifts, picks up his camera at the beginning of a shift, download at the end when they come back for their next shift. The videos are up in evidence.com, and they go back on their regular shift to work. Where we fell short was in considering how we were going to outfit and deploy our specialized units. So I spent, we actually deployed them under our specialized units toward the end of January of 2017, and probably about a week after all of our specialized units were wearing them was when a lot of the questions began to arise that you've kind of already heard before. So I spent about a week doing a lot of policy research at different agencies and seeing what kind of best practices were out there, and really came up with very little. The ASU study came out, I believe, in February, which was extremely helpful to see that we weren't the only department having these types of struggles. So looking at our policy first, we really didn't have anything that addressed specialized units. We had a small section in there that dealt with our resident officers that are in our outline areas, which essentially said that if you get a call and it takes you 45 minutes to drive out there to that dry lake bed, you don't have to activate your camera until you're about 5 miles out, because what was the point of recording 45 minutes to an hour of just drive time? That was really about the only thing that we had in policy that addressed anything remotely dealing with specialized units. So obviously we put some effort into looking back at the policy, and it bringing all these specialized units to the tables, even just through representatives, it quickly bogged it down. So if you're looking to do your policy, I would get the feedback first, have some decision makers at the table rather than have it policy by committee, or you're going to end up with competing interests. And we essentially had each specialized unit requesting their own specific policy to address it, as well as what their own exceptions should be. So we're still in the process of revising that policy, and it is going rather slowly. Some of the solutions that were poised early on, but really fell down to budget concerns, was, well, give every specialized unit officer 2 cameras. Again, that's costly, and it doesn't really solve the problem. We have a lot of officers putting in for overtime to upload their videos after an event, since we have the policy reads that you will upload your camera prior to the end of shift, so we're not taking evidence home on that. Right now, we're currently looking at a single dock solution because we use Taser to allow officers basically to get home and upload from there. But some of that, as Commander Johnson intimated, was concerns that the union has over who's paying for their internet and is it secure enough. Our technology concerns through our IT department was we have tablets, but it's not really as secure as they would like it to be, as well as our IT department's not a real big fan of Wi-Fi uploads. So there are options out there. It depends really what you're looking to spend on your budget versus, I guess, the practicality of actually using that. So, you know, if you can bring those specialized units in prior to actually rolling that out, that way you can try to address those concerns on the front end. We kind of fell short when it became more of an afterthought for us, and so we're trying to play catch-up right now with our specialized unit. I would look at some type of comprehensive policy versus addressing a number of different policies that might become cumbersome, because obviously each policy is going to call for their own exception depending on the unit that you have. You know, the mindset of the officers as well in these specialized units. Again, some of that information has already been relayed about tactics and call out from home and things of that nature that you're going to need to consider. The end of shift upload, I know it's a best practice for patrol, as well as we're trying to still keep that in place for our specialized unit, but again, you have overtime concerns and budgetary concerns that you're going to need to address with that, as well as you know, the legal ramifications in the event that you are taking home that's what's considered evidence at this time on your camera. And continue to look for best practices that are out there and talk to these other departments, because that's really going to be key. That about wraps it up for my end of the presentation, and I will turn it over now to Assistant Chief Mike Petty, and thank you very much for your time.
My name's Assistant Chief Mike Petty. I'm with the Fayetteville, North Carolina Police Department. A lot of the things that have been said already, I hope that I can just reiterate and possibly give you some additional tips, just to kind of give you a background of Fayetteville and our agency. We have approximately 207,000 in population. We are a heavy military community with Fort Bragg sitting at our boundaries. We also have 2 major universities in town, and we are the largest city in the southeast of North Carolina, so we're a shopping and entertainment destination for many of the people that live in the southeast. The police department has 433 sworn positions, and we began our body-worn camera program early in 2014. We actually spent about, I think it was 16 months beta testing cameras prior to deciding which brand and model we were going to go with. We currently have 500 body-worn cameras in stock, or in our inventory rather, and we were the 2015 recipient of a BJA competitive body-worn camera grant. That grant initially allowed us to purchase 300 units, and we opted to go with a 2-piece unit, and everybody from our patrol units, sergeant and below, were equipped. As I stated, we did a lot of beta testing and thought we knew it all, but we quickly realized that we didn't. One of the things our current chief at the time had indicated to our public was that officers would be equipped with cameras 24/7, and we quickly realized that at some point they had to download the video and attach those cameras to a charging station. And what we ended up doing was buying 200 one-piece backup units. 120 were put in the spare, and then that gave us 80 to issue out to our specialized units and detectives. One of the other issues we had was the take-home car program. We did have officers driving cars home, and we did not want them operating a vehicle not equipped with some type of camera. One of our more recent officer-involved shootings, in fact, occurred with an officer coming to work, and he did not have all of his equipment in the vehicle activated, so the actual shooting was not caught. So that posed an additional problem for us, and we opted to go with the spares as a backup method. So just a couple of the specialized units. This isn't all of them, but there's 2 in particular, 3 in particular that I wanted to speak of today. One of them was our major crimes unit, which is all of our detective divisions, specifically our emergency response team, or SWAT, and we have a violent criminal apprehension team in Fayetteville. Many of you may call them fugitive teams. But the important thing is all of our units have access. About the only units that we have that aren't equipped with some type of camera is our narcotics vice units, some specialized undercover units, and our admin sections, but they all have access if they so desire. One of the units I would like to discuss briefly that's not on this list was our motor units for our traffic guys. About the only issue we can say there, since we have the backup cameras and the actual downloading and storage isn't a concern, was the particular units we have mount with magnets to the helmets, and we realized at 70 miles per hour those magnets lose their ability to keep the camera attached. So a clip-on type of system is what we're going to opt for next. So the emergency response team, or our SWAT team again, we sort of ran into an issue here more recently, and I'm limited in what I can say because we still have officers actually on administrative duty for it. Our emergency response team had a policy that anytime they performed anything called deliberate action, they were required to activate their cameras. Earlier this year, we had a standoff situation that lasted for about 8 hours. The SWAT team had introduced gas into this building, so much so that the structure, internal structure, eventually had to be destroyed and dismantled because it was so much gas was used. They were trying to get an individual who our VCAT team had actually gone after on warrants, who barricaded himself inside a 4-apartment complex. To make a longer story short, the subject made access to the roof line or the attic area, and for 8 hours they attempted to locate him. They actually thought that he had escaped somehow, so their attention to detail and their tactics, I hate to say, were probably a little lacking. In order to conduct the search, they began to remove some of their gear in order to get up into the attic space. Their Kevlar and their heavy armor, they opted for soft armor to be able to navigate through the attic. In doing such, the individuals that were actually doing the search had removed their cameras. Couple that with the fact that we were out there for about 8 hours and you had various stages of battery life on cameras. I hate to say it, ultimately the individual was found. He produced a weapon and was subsequently shot and killed. We did get a little grief from our city council in the fact that after spending approximately $1.5 million, we had nothing on video. So we learned a very valuable lesson there as to what do you do in these prolonged operations when you are required or needed to have video. So our basically our technical services division created a mobile charging station. There's nothing out there on the market currently available that we could find, but they basically put 2 USB hubs that have 10 charging stations in each hub, mounted it with an RV converter, and is now on our emergency response team equipment truck, so that there will be 20 cameras and our batteries constantly being charged. So mobile charging stations is something that folks might want to look into. The other issue we realize is ERT. Our ERT is a part-time team. It's made up of individuals across the police department. So depending upon where you're assigned, will dictate what type of camera you have. So we have multiple camera mounts required for these ERT guys. And what we've realized is that when you're switching out from equipment to equipment, they prefer the one-piece units. There's less that they have to move over. So we are eventually at our agency going to progress over to a single one-piece unit. We're getting ready to come up on 2.5 years, and we'll have all our units replaced. So the question came up again about tactics being compromised. We did meet with our SWAT team commanders and members of the ERT team, and the general consensus was that the liability for not having a camera outweighed their concerns. They also even mentioned that as far as standard entry tactics, just about anybody there could probably go on YouTube and see a video of how SWAT teams make entry into a room or a house. So, and that was them talking, not command staff, and so they opted to go ahead and go with the camera. The other unit I'd like to talk about is our VCAT team. They are a violent criminal apprehension team. We outfitted them with cameras again. They like the one-piece unit for the various types of outfits and that they wear. And I'll just make a reference to the Charlotte, North Carolina riots that occurred when a version of their VCAT team attempted to take Keith Lamont Scott into custody and ended up shooting him. You have some detectives that have a suit and tie, or they cross over to a raid vest, so that one-piece unit is definitely something that they would prefer. Recordings for interviews may be limited. Even with $1.5 million, we did not opt for unlimited storage, so we do not allow our officers by policy to to record interviews. There's nothing in our state that says we can't. It's strictly a storage and cost issue for us. We have other avenues available to do that should they choose. So we don't mind, obviously, recording for the initial response or into a scene, but we don't want interviews and we don't want any crime scene documentation. We have video cameras for that, so that's something that you might want to consider dependent upon your storage capabilities. Lastly, we realized that patrol units become accustomed to activating their cameras, and so additional training for some of your specialized units may be in order. And I refer to it like muscle memory when you shoot. They just need to understand that when something happens or they get ready to go do something, they need to activate that camera. We've had a couple of situations where the detectives did have cameras on but failed to activate them it was just a sleight of their mind. They weren't accustomed to doing that. So we recommend additional training, especially if you do RBT training. We try to incorporate that into our academies as well so that people get on the habit of actually activating it. And lastly, we don't allow juvenile recordings. Of course, in North Carolina, you have to have a non-testimonial identification order to take a picture recording of a child. So that's an issue for your juvenile sections if they do have cameras. And that is my presentation.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being on this webinar. At the moment, are there any other questions that you would like to ask our panelists? We haven't had any submitted, but here's your chance to ask a question if you have one. And if not, and you think of one later, you can email us at bwctta@cna.org. John, would you like to have any last remarks?
Hi, thanks, Denise. I did have one question that I'd like to ask. So, one thing we're seeing is, I think, obviously an expansion of body-worn cameras in our grant program. We're now seeing new applicants who want to expand beyond patrol. Beyond that, we're seeing specialized agencies, some of whom have already been grantees, such as tribal police, school police, and university police. But now we're seeing more applicants either expanding their current program or new programs looking to implement body-worn cameras in correctional settings, jails, and even state prisons. Have any of the presenters used them in your agency lockups? And have you seen any benefits or challenges from those implementations?
This is Lieutenant Leon from Las Vegas. I know here in Las Vegas Metro we are exploring that option of using them in our correctional facility, but right now it's nothing more than something that's on the drawing board, sir.
Okay. And do you foresee any problems or challenges with that, or is it just a sort of a learn as we go type of thing, like so much else with body-worn cameras?
I believe you nailed it right on the head, sir, is learn as you go in this field right now.
Great. Did any questions come in, Dominique, while I was talking?
No, sir. But I'm sure we'll get some email to us, so I appreciate everyone's participation. I do want to follow up by saying there will be an evaluation following this webinar, so please give us your feedback, as well as if you have any more questions, you can visit us on our website at the link attached to the slide as well. So thank you, everyone, for being on, and thank you again to our panelists. Have a great day.
All right, thanks, Dominique.